play it any louder, then it's getting shut down.
My name is Waffles, and I'm a government whistleblower turned political commentator, and this is the last 24 hours in the news. I'm going to be changing my news report a little bit because it's getting a little too long. So this is going to be the news highlights for the past 24 hours for the United States. And it is currently 10:53 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Today is November 22nd, 2025. Appeals court blocks expansion of fast-track deportations sought by the administration. A federal appeals court declined the administration's bid to expand an expedited deportation process for migrants living away from the border, limiting a major enforcement push. This is a direct judicial check on an aggressive immigration policy the White House has pursued. Ongoing litigation in high-profile federal cases involving the president remain active. National litigation trackers and recent filings continue to list multiple pending criminal and civil matters tied to Donald Trump. Supreme Court and appellate filings remain in rotation and could affect both federal authority and the president's legal exposure. Federal courts continue to push back on domestic federalization of security forces. Multiple federal judges have ruled against or limited the administration's deployments of federal or federalized National Guard forces. Portions of deployment to Portland and Washington, D.C. were found unlawful or blocked by courts. These rulings underscore constitutional and statutory limits on federal military and police intervention in cities. The litigation and injunctions remain live and are a principal restraint on further ad hoc federalization. Administration website content edits raising civil rights and scientific integrity concerns. There are reports that a government public health website was altered in ways critics say contradict established science, a politically charged organization that could affect public trust and rights to accurate health information. This highlights a governance risk where political direction potentially overrides scientific guidance. Domestic protests and organized mobilizations continue. Counter-mobilizations and threats followed. Large protests, including Remove the Regime actions and related demonstrations, occurred yesterday. These mobilizations have prompted heightened attention from local law enforcement and legal actors. At the same time, several Democratic lawmakers reported receiving bomb threats after inflammatory social media rhetoric from the president and allies, a development that raises the risk of political violence escalation and requires urgent law enforcement tracking. Court rulings and legal constraints on deployments are not ending tensions, even as courts have blocked or limited federal troop and guard deployments in some cities. The substantive pattern of the administration attempting federalized security responses remains a civil risk flashpoint, producing protests, city and state confrontations, and for potential for violent escalation where coordination breaks down. Investigative reporting indicates the White House has at times moved forward with lethal or forceful operations, e.g. strikes outside of traditional war zones. Despite international legal concerns, those actions raise accountability questions about legal authorization, oversight, and civilian harm. Active National Guard and federal force deployments remain a central U.S. domestic issue. The administration has ordered and attempted multiple large federal or federalized National Guard deployments to cities, D.C., Portland, Los Angeles, and others as part of domestic security operations. Judges in several jurisdictions have blocked or curtailed these deployments as unlawful or exceeding statutory authority. Appeals and stays continue. This is an ongoing constitutional and safety risk because deployment decisions affect civil liberties, local policing authority, and the potential for paramilitary encounters with civilians. Mobilizations tied to political actors and rhetoric, public rhetoric from the president and senior aides that casts political opponents as seditious or otherwise merits extraordinary punishment has coincided with threats against politicians and heightened political tension, a dynamic that increases the risk of state action or extrajudicial pressure against political adversaries. Law enforcement monitoring of threats is ongoing. Possible federal preemption of state AI rules being pursued in Congress and administration channels. House Republican leadership is reported to be pushing preemption of state AI laws, potentially using major legislative vehicles, e.g., defense or budget bills, to centralize regulation. That shift could strip states of local protections and oversight designed to protect consumer privacy, labor, and safety, concentrating regulatory power in the federal executive and Congress. There's a cat chewing on my foot. All right, he's gone now. Federal workforce reductions and institution strains flagged by policy researchers. Recent analysis warned that aggressive staffing cuts and reorganization of federal agencies are straining core government services and raising the risk of operational failures, affecting everything from benefit delivery to regulatory enforcement. For citizens reliant on social safety nets or regulated services, that is a direct well-being risk. Social safety rollout and SNAP litigation continues over the administration's suspension or modification of benefits such as SNAP. Legal challenges argue the moves harm vulnerable populations and exceed statutory authority. These disputes are live policy fights that directly affect food security for low-income households. The cat is back and chewing on my foot again. Major internet and infrastructure fragility, multi-service outages underscore systemic risk. Recent large outages, Cloudflare and other infrastructure providers have disrupted major services and transit sites, exposing how concentrated internet routing and vendor configurations can cascade into broad consumer and infrastructure failures. Policymakers and regulators are being urged to treat digital infrastructure resilience as critical national infrastructure. Grid and power outage vulnerabilities heading into winter. Grid Monitor and Industry Reporting warns of increased risk of longer power outages this winter in parts of the U.S., New England, Southeast, and Texas, amplified by rising demand centers, data centers, and extreme weather stressors. These risks have direct consequences for public safety, heating, medical devices, water pumping. Public health update: respiratory virus activity remains elevated in places. CDC surveillance updated November 21st. The CDC's latest respiratory virus activity dashboard shows ongoing COVID, flu, and RSV activity in multiple states. Health officials continue to monitor trends as the season progresses. Elevated respiratory activity can raise hospitalization risk among vulnerable groups, especially if vaccination rates are low or public health messaging is unclear. Concerns about politicization of public health messaging, reporting that a federal public health site was altered in ways some say contradict scientific consensus. Example, content change flagged in AP reporting raises risks. Politicized health guidance can reduce vaccine uptake, slow early detection, and undermine trust in emergency responses, heightening population health risk. In international relations, U.S. diplomatic pressure and controversial peace plan for Ukraine. On the international front, a U.S. proposed 28-point peace plan for Ukraine, reportedly widely in the last day, has created diplomatic friction with allies and intense criticism from Kiev, including concerns that the plan demands concessions that could cede Ukraine territory or limit its defense options. Reports indicate the U.S. threatened aid reductions if Ukraine refused. This raises questions about U.S. leverage and whether unilateral U.S. moves are being made without adequate allied consultation. A major foreign policy and moral hazard. COP30 disruption and other diplomatic flashpoints. A fire at COP30 pavilion in Brazil briefly disrupted sessions. Diplomatic and logistical fragility at major summits can slow multilateral action on climate and humanitarian topics where U.S. leadership matters. Active federal and state litigation continues. Trackers show multiple pending matters, civil suits, and criminal indictments from earlier years, appellate work, and Supreme Court filings. Recent Supreme Court docket documents and litigation trackers demonstrate filings are progressing through the courts. None of the big cases were fully resolved in the last 24 hours, but appeals and filings remain active and could produce near-term rulings. Administration's legal counteractions and prosecutions mixed outcomes. At the same time, the administration has attempted aggressive legal maneuvers, including prosecutorial and regulatory pushes against critics. Several of those actions have been limited by the courts. Examples: limits on deportation expansion, injunctions on troop deployments. Courts are therefore playing a crucial balance of powers role. Shock event and lewd and concerning behavior. Investigative reporting documents the administration moving forward with strikes despite legal concerns. A Washington Post report today describes senior officials at the White House proceeding with forceful operations while sidelining legal counsel concerns. A shock event in the sense of unexpected forceful action with serious legal and ethical questions and potential civilian costs. This merits oversight and transparency. This is in regards to the strikes on the fishermen in the Gulf Coast. Threatening rhetoric and downstream violent threats, pattern of lewd and derogatory rhetoric. In the last 24 hours, there are credible reports of bomb threats received by Democratic lawmakers after inflammatory posts linked to the president's social platforms. Separately, the president's long history of lewd and demeaning rhetoric and periodic reposting or amplification of obscene content continues to be a public concern because such rhetoric can normalize harassment and escalate threats. Recent threats to lawmakers show that rhetoric has public safety consequences. For historical context on patterns of lewd commentary, see long-standing reporting for the immediate security outcome. Quick assessment, risk to citizens and what to watch next. Immediate legal and institutional breaks. Federal courts remain the main check on the administration's most aggressive domestic security and immigration moves. Watch for appeals court rulings and any emergency stays. Civil risk flashpoints. Rhetoric plus mobilizations equal elevated risk of politically motivated threats and violence. Law enforcement should prioritize credible threats to elected officials and public. Civil risk flashpoints. Rhetoric plus mobilizations equals elevated risk of politically motivated threats and violence. Law enforcement should prioritize credible threats to elected officials and public gatherings. Citizens should avoid predictable flashpoints while protests continue. Public service and infrastructure vulnerabilities, internet and grid fragility could cascade into public health or safety failures. During extreme weather or mass events, regulators should brief states on contingency plans. Transparency priorities. Any use of force, strikes, domestic deployments, lethal operations requires documented legal authority. Oversight briefings to Congress and public release of legal memos or redacted opinions. Appeals court blocks expansion of rapid deportations. The administration sought. A U.S. appeals court ruled the administration cannot expand its expedited deportation authority as proposed. This is a near-term legal check on an aggressive immigration enforcement push. Why it matters: the blocks reduce the administration's operational latitude and preserve procedural safeguards for migrants. The ruling will likely be appealed. Watch filings and emergency stay requests. Bomb threats to Democratic lawmakers after presidential posts accusing them of seditious behavior. Multiple Democratic official offices have received bomb threats in the wake of the president's social platform posts accusing them of sedition. Reports across outlets surfaced in the last 24 hours. This has direct public safety consequences tied to presidential rhetoric. It elevates the risk of politically motivated violence and requires FBI and Capitol security transparency on threats and attribution. To keep up on this issue, keep an eye on records requests for threat reports. Ask the FBI and Capitol Police for timelines and assessments. Linking the posts to the threats. A federal judge orders an end or halt of National Guard deployment in Washington, D.C. Order put on a short stay for appeal. What happened? A U.S. district judge ordered the administration to end the D.C. National Guard deployment, citing unlawful intrusion on local authority. The judge stayed the order for a short period to allow appeal. This shows that the courts again policing domestic and military force deployment. Any appeal briefing will reveal the administration's legal theory for using troops on U.S. soil. If you want to follow up on this issue, you can pull the full order PDF. The administration's filing in opposition on the appeal docket demand any legal memos authorizing the deployment. Tennessee judge blocks governor's National Guard deployment to Memphis. A state law challenge. A state chancery court held the governor likely exceeded Tennessee militia law by deploying Guard troops to Memphis without legislative action. Why it matters, a novel angle. State law constraints, not just federal constitutional claims, are being used to limit deployments. This adds a jurisdictional layer to the national debate over domestic troop use. For follow-up, obtain the Tennessee Chancery ruling and examine a statutory text cited. Interview state lawmakers and local officials about the factual basis for the judge's decision. Cloudflare service outage, post-mortem infrastructure fragility that can cascade into public harms. What happened? Cloudflare published a post-mortem for a November 18th outage caused by a bot management configuration bug that took down major services, X, New Jersey Transit pages, etc. Why it matters, this demonstrates how single vendor configuration failures can disrupt transit, critical service information, and emergency communications, a systemic consumer and infrastructure vulnerability. The source for this was the Cloudflare official blog postmortem published November 18th, 2025. For follow-up, if you'd like to keep up on this issue, ask transit agencies for emergency management offices for incident reports, request vendor contracts, SLAs from critical agencies to assess single point of failure risk. CDC Public Health websites edit flagged as including false claims, concerns about politicized guidance. What happened? Reporting indicates a CDC webpage was altered to include inaccurate assertions. Example flagged regarding autism and vaccine language. Coverage surfaced in the last 48 hours. Why it matters, politicized or incorrect federal health guidance can suppress vaccinations, delay response, and undermine trust. Direct public health risk with disproportionate harm to vulnerable groups. If you'd like to follow up on this matter, get the archived versions, Wayback Archives, and the agency's change logs, FOIA the records for who authorized the edits, and any political office communications. Just Security Litigation Trackers concentrated update of legal challenges to the administration's actions. What happened? Just Security posted a refreshed tracker November 21st cataloging immigration, deployment, benefits suspension, and other suits against the administration. Why it matters, the tracker captures quiet filings and procedural moves that don't make headlines but determine the pace of legal checks. Ideal for spotting near-term injunction risks. If you would like to follow up on this, mind the tracker for low-profile filings, motions for temporary restraining orders, emergency appeals, and set alerts on those dockets. Amazon warehouse union line. Workers authorize strike at unionized sites. Labor and supply chain risk. Thousands at Amazon's first unionized warehouse voted to authorize a strike. Teamsters and local organizations moving toward action. Reports surfaced overnight this morning, about authorizations and potential dates. Why it matters, a holiday season strike at a major logistics nodes poses real consumer disruption risks and intersecting political pressures. Administration rhetoric on labor and supply chain resilience. If you want to keep an eye on this, reach out to local union reps for strike timelines, obtain employer contingency plans, and check DHS, FEMA, and Commerce advisories on supply chain stress. Shadow docket, emergency Supreme Court activity remains a pressure point. Watch for rapid rulings. Tracker projects continued use of the Supreme Court shadow docket to resolve emergency petitions involving administration policies. Several emergency filings are active. Fast, non-argument decisions can dramatically change policy implementation with limited transparency, a structural governance and accountability concern. If you would like to keep an eye on this, subscribe to the Brennan Center, that's BRENNAN Center feed, and pull any new emergency certiorari or state memos filed overnight.
So the Olympics is great, and Johnny for the others, the World Cup, Johnny is the head of it. We had our top people, Wasserman. They all came in on the Olympics, and then I saw Johnny. And we got the World Cup too. And it's only because they rigged the election that I'll be your president representing you there. I got both of them. I got the Olympics and I got the World Cup. And I said, it's too bad. One was in 2026 and the other was in 2028. And I said, I won't be there. I won't be your president. But then they rigged the election and now we won. So I'm going to be your president for the Olympics and for the World Cup. So, Johnny, thank you for the World Cup. And everybody, thank you for the Olympics. We're going to have a great time.
Hey guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment to my videos. And also, don't forget to check out my shop where you could get this awesome Real Patriots Punch Nazis t-shirt. America, fuck yeah! And if you go to the link tree in my bio on most platforms, it's got links to everything, all of my stuff. You can find my shop there. I'm on eBay. You can also get this cool Exterminate MAGA sticker, because MAGA's fucking cockroaches. And fuck MAGA, abolish MAGA, fuck you MAGA.